Hello to all you wonderful skeptics out there. This is the Skeptical Skeptic back again, and today I'm going to be taking a bit of a break from my usual content, talking about religion and atheism and that kind of stuff, and instead dipping my toe into the political scene for a bit. Now, I have made some political videos before on this channel and on my older channel, but for the most part, when I started uploading videos on YouTube at the end of last year, I never really intended to get into explicitly political content, and was more planning to just focus on anti-theist content, which makes sense. I just recently started going through my, whole angry atheist phase, fuck religion, and I was still in Catholic high school, so I was pretty much force-fed a new line of religious bullshit every week that I just felt like I had to get my thoughts out on. To be clear, this channel still is an atheist channel, and I am very much still an angry atheist who thinks that religion is a scourge on humanity that should be eradicated. But, I've been going through a fairly major political awakening in the last year, and with the absolute insanity that has been going on in the country and in the world in 2020, I can't help but find myself in utter shock and awe at the political landscape that exists right now. I mean, even the most nonpartisan, non-political normie of normies can't escape the absolute dumpster fire that is American politics right now. Everyone has a strong opinion about what needs to be done, who needs to be elected, and what the real problems facing America are. And yet it seems that whoever wins the election, and whatever direction the country ends up going in down the road, everybody loses. Yeah, 2020 is officially fucking us all in the ass. I guess I do kind of appreciate, though, that, everything is just put in plain view for the world to see this year all at once, rather than for the water to slowly heat up before we all realize we're being boiled alive. So, yeah. About 2 months ago, I uploaded a video on the current state of the election that I analyzed through the campaign emails and messages that I was receiving from Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and Bernie Sanders. But honestly, even though there's so much more to say about this election now, after so many things have transpired over the past month, this video is not going to be about the current state of the election. Perhaps I'll make a video about the election after it ends, but right now I honestly just don't feel like making another video about it. I'm just so fed up with talking about this freaking election. My mind cannot take this stupidity, seriously. Honestly, weirdly enough, it's actually the first time I'm ever going to be able to vote in an election. I'm 18 now, and I live in a swing state, hooray, which means I'm going to have to choose between these two wonderful candidates for president. Oh, Satan, help us. But whatever, instead of talking about the stupidity of 2020, I'm going to talk about the stupidity of, some of the stupidity of 2019, because I guess I'm just nostalgic for the times when society wasn't literally crumbling before all of our eyes. In this video, I will be doing yet another response video in the same vein as the one I last uploaded, only this time I will be responding to a video from good old Dennis Prager on the YouTube channel Prageru titled "The Left Ruins Everything." For those of you who don't know who Dennis Prager is, he was a conservative radio talk show host, which basically means that he's the least credible type of person you should ever consult for information on anything. And he is the founder of Prageru, which, despite its misleading name, is not actually a university, but is instead a YouTube channel with no educational credentials whatsoever. It even says on their website, Prager University is not an accredited academic institution and does not offer certificates or diplomas, but it is a place where you are free to learn. Really inspiring a lot of confidence there. Yeah. I wouldn't exactly call this YouTube channel a place of learning. PragerU is a propaganda institution aimed at using the tools of social media to spread a particularly insidious brand of conservative, religious, and right-wing nationalist ideology to young people. And in many ways, it's succeeded, with the sum of all of its videos amassing over 4 billion views in total across YouTube and other social media platforms. Now, although it does take in some small dollar donations, the vast sum of its funding that allowed it to get off the ground in the first place came from fracking billionaires Dan and Ferris Wilkes, as well as other big money conservative donors. The success of PragerU is definitely not organic for obvious reasons, as usually people are drawn to content that, is actually good. It's received an immense amount of funds from big money interests which pay for constant advertisements online and search engine optimization, which, by the way, is pretty much how every single well-known online conservative activist became popular in the first place, through massive advertising spending from big money donors. Seriously, I haven't been able to go on YouTube without seeing an ad for the Shapiros in months. But yeah, it's the leftists who are in control of YouTube, and also coincidentally have a lot of their content majorly deprioritized by YouTube. Well, look at that. I searched for a left-leaning political commentator and immediately got hit with a giant ad for a right-wing YouTuber. Interesting. Of course, it's utter nonsense that YouTube has a bias against conservative content. In reality, YouTube has a bias against anything remotely controversial, which is why a video by the formerly educational, recently bread-tubed YouTube channel Second Thought, titled America's Police Problem, warns viewers of offensive content before they watch. Of course, having a lot of money always helps quite a bit in pushing back against censorship and deprioritization from big tech. By the end of 2020, it's estimated that PragerU will have raked in $25 million for that year alone. So, of course, because PragerU is funded by big money interests, it's also going to be majorly biased in favor of those interests. Oh, what's that? PragerU constantly defends big business in the fossil fuel industry? Who could have guessed that? Well, I mean, I'm sure they're definitely honest actors, and there's absolutely no incentive to do propaganda for the corporate donors at all. Anyway, I'm not going to try to go on this massive crusade dedicating my life to bring down PragerU, though it is tempting. But with PragerU making a lot of moves recently to try to implement PragerU propaganda curriculum in secondary education classrooms, while at the same time our Commander-in-Chief Donald Trump has been constantly going off about how the radical left is indoctrinating our children, oh the irony, and trying to destroy the country. I thought that as someone who identifies as being on the left, I would take a look at PragerU's video, The Left Ruins Everything, and try to debunk all the ridiculous bullshit smears and fear-mongering within it. Anyway, let's get right to it. Let's see why the left ruins everything. According to Dennis, women should have sex with their husbands even if they don't want to. Prager.
If what I am about to tell you is true, almost everything we most treasure, freedom, beauty, reason, the family, economic well-being, and even goodness, is in jeopardy.
All right then, starting right out of the gate with some fear-mongering, establishing the fact that even the most fundamental definitions of goodness that people value are in jeopardy. A very common tactic of propaganda is, after all, stoking fear and paranoia about a constant onslaught on people's way of life. Anyway, do tell us, Dennis, why is everything we so treasure being put in terrible danger?
Who or what poses this threat? The answer is the most powerful ideology of the last 100 years, leftism. Not liberalism, leftism, or if you prefer, progressivism. Leftism destroys everything it touches.
Ah, yes. It's all leftism's fault. Leftism destroys everything it touches. Just so you know, this guy is not speaking hyperbolically here. Dennis Prager genuinely believes, or at least wants his audience to genuinely believe, that leftism is the cause of literally every problem that exists in the world. Nearly every single video on this channel, even if it has nothing to do with left versus right politics, tries to hit home the idea that there is this massive, unstoppable leftist conspiracy intent on destroying the world. Also, I just love how Dennis Prager just straight up says, the left destroys everything it touches, as if the left is this physical thing. Like, I legit don't think that Dennis Prager realizes that the left is not this monolithic entity, but instead encompasses a wide range of different political ideologies, just like the right does. I mean, you know, there are people who are far left, there are people who are just slightly left of center, there are anarcho-communists, there are Stalinists, Leninists, Marxists, democratic socialists, and social libertarians. The last one listed being what I identify as. But, you know, Dennis Prager is a conservative, so obviously he doesn't care about things like, nuance. He just sees everything in black and white. Right good, left bad. I certainly don't think that way, and I know most people who are left of center also don't really think that way. It's kind of thing that really mainly happens with a lot of conservatives. Also, Dennis Prager seems to be a little confused with the political definitions used here. He makes a clear distinction that he is criticizing leftism, but not liberalism. And while, yes, being on the left and being a liberal are not necessarily the same thing, you can be a liberal who's on the left. Those two things are not necessarily contradictory. Yes, it's true that there are some capitalistic right-wingers who identify as liberals, but a better term for those kinds of people would generally be free market libertarians. And it is true that there are some people on the left who are opposed to liberalism, but this is usually in regards to neoliberalism, which can pretty much be summed up by this meme on screen right now. Oh, and also this one. The funny thing is that Dennis Prager makes a distinction between liberalism and leftism, but he also says that another word for leftism is progressivism. Well, that kind of ends up creating a real problem because progressive and liberal, by most accounts, mean the same thing. Let's actually read some of the definitions for progressive, shall we? 1. Favoring or advocating progress, change, improvement, or reform, as opposed to wishing to maintain things as they are, especially in political matters. 2. Making progress towards better conditions, employing or advocating more enlightened or liberal ideas, new or experimental methods, etc. 3. Characterized by such progress or by continuous improvement. 4. Of or relating to any of the progressive parties in politics. And 5. Going forward or onward, passing successively from one member of a series to the next, proceeding step by step. Now let's read some of the definitions for the word liberal. 1. Favorable to progress or reform, as in political or religious affairs. 2. Noting or pertaining to a political party, advocating measures of progressive political reform. 3. Of pertaining to, based on, or advocating liberalism, especially the freedom of the individual and governmental guarantees of individual rights and liberties. 4. Favorable to or in accord with the concepts of maximum individual freedom possible, as guaranteed by law and secured by governmental protection of civil liberties. 5. Favoring or permitting freedom of action, especially with respect to matters of personal belief or expression. 6. Of or relating to representational forms of government rather than aristocracies and monarchies. 7. Free from prejudice or bigotry, tolerant. And 8. Open-minded or tolerant, especially free of or not bound by traditional or conventional ideas, values, etc. They seem pretty similar, don't they? Granted, progressive might have more of an emphasis on change, while liberal might have more of an emphasis on freedom, but by and large, progressive and liberal mean almost the same thing, which is why the first synonym listed for progressive is liberal, and the first synonym listed for liberal is progressive. And just to further show that liberalism is not in conflict with being on the left, the synonyms given for the political left include both liberal and progressive, with the antonyms being conservative and right. And the definitions given for the political left are 2. Of or belonging to the political left, having liberal or radical views in politics. 6. The complex of individuals or organized groups advocating liberal reform or revolutionary change in the social, political, or economic order. And 7. The part of a legislative assembly, especially in continental Europe, that is situated on the left side of the presiding officer and that is customarily assigned to members of the legislature who hold more radical and socialistic views than the rest of its members. The members of such an assembly who sit on the left. And left wing is 1. Members of a liberal or radical political party or those favoring extensive political reform, and 3. The part of a political or social organization advocating a liberal or radical position. So, yes, Dennis Prager, as it turns out, progressive, liberal, left wing, though not always, they usually go together. Being in the political left does necessarily mean advocating for some degree of socialism and social organization, and usually involves rejecting the established hierarchy, which is why it's often called radical, but none of that is opposed to liberalism or progressivism. Also, because political theory is nuanced, people's beliefs almost always are much more complicated than simply where they fit on the left-right spectrum. However, generally speaking, when people usually refer to left versus right, the farther left you are on the spectrum, the more you value equality, and the further right you are on the spectrum, the more you value hierarchy. Just thought I'd explain some definitions before I get into the rest of the video, because despite being a so-called accredited educational university, Dennis Prager sure as hell never explains political definitions other than through the lens of whether they are good or bad.
Here are just a few examples. 1.
Oh, I see. It's a list then. Okay, well, I'm eager to see all the totally legitimate examples of the evil left destroying everything good and wholesome. Let's see then.
The universities. Perhaps the most obvious example, one that many liberals acknowledge, is the left's near destruction of most universities as places of learning. In the words of Harvard professor Steven Pinker, an atheist and a liberal, because of the left, quote, universities are becoming laughingstocks of intolerance, unquote. At almost every university, and now high schools and even elementary schools, students are taught to shut down, not debate, those who differ with them, and to rely on feelings rather than reason.
Ah, yes, the universities, pretty much the go-to scapegoat for every single conservative and right-winger when talking about the insidious infiltration of liberalism, secularism, and leftism into society. I'm not going to claim that there isn't a liberal and left-wing bias for most professors on most college campuses, because there certainly is, and I'm also not going to claim that there hasn't been a push from many college campuses to crack down on so-called hate speech, because there has, and as someone who has been personally censored in the past by conservative Christians who were triggered when I expressed anti-theistic beliefs, I understand how important it is to protect the freedom of expression for so-called offensive speech. And even though I might think a lot of the doctrine coming from conservatives and right-wingers is ridiculous and harmful, I would never try to object to anyone exercising their First Amendment rights, except under the most extreme circumstances. See, what Dennis Prager doesn't seem to understand is that when you look at the political compass, it is divided between the left and right axis as well as the authoritarian and libertarian axis. Yes, it's true that there are some authoritarian left-wingers who do try to censor freedom of speech, but there are also a lot of people on the left, like me, who would fall on the side of a social libertarian, and I would absolutely be willing to call out anyone on the left advocating for censorship or deplatforming. Likewise, there are also many libertarian right-wingers, but there are also many authoritarian right-wingers as well, who want to control people and censor speech that they find offensive. Free speech is not a right-wing value, and censorship is not a left-wing value. It just so happens that censorship becomes much easier and more attractive when the majority of people in an environment, especially people in positions of power, hold majority opinions that differ from the majority. I mean, just look back to the 1940s and 1950s era, a time when anyone who disagreed with the unified conservative social order was labeled as a fascist, a communist, and an anti-American. For example, I recently finished reading the book God Was Not on Trial, which gives a secondhand account of the story behind the McCollum v. Board of Education Supreme Court case in 1948, which ruled that religious classes being held in public schools was unconstitutional. The plaintiff, Vashti McCollum, had many of her friends stop talking to her. She got hundreds of angry phone calls and letters insulting her, saying she was going to burn in hell. She was called a communist. She was called an anti-American. She had rotten vegetables peddled at her. Her son was bullied and beaten. Her cat was lynched. And the State University of Illinois literally tried to pass a bill that would allow the University of Illinois to legally fire anyone just for being an atheist, which would have left her husband without a job. That's what freedom of speech looks like when conservative Christians control the discourse, by the way. But I mean, that was in the past, right? Things are different now. I mean, it's not like the conservative right-wing president of the United States has gone on record as saying that people who kneel for the national anthem should be fired from their job and people who burn the American flag should go to prison, and literally deployed the military to use tear gas on peaceful protesters so he could do a Bible photo op. No, you see, it's the whiny pink-haired kids on college campuses who are the real threats to the First Amendment. Also, I will point out that when regressives like Dennis Prager talk about the left being so intolerant and closed-minded, oftentimes they're not actually trying to shut down your freedom of speech. They're just criticizing you for your shitty and unpopular opinions. I can't speak for every university, but I have serious doubts that most university professors teach people to shut down debate and rely on feelings over facts. I've been in college for about 2 months now, and my sociology and writing professors are both very left-leaning, and they both talk all the time in class about the importance of discussion and debate and opening yourself up to different points of view, and recognizing logical fallacies and using logic and reason and research and skepticism to come to a conclusion. This may come as a shock to you, Dennis Prager, but many people who are on the left aren't on the left because they rely on feelings or facts or because of some grand Marxist conspiracy theory, but they are on the left because they are highly educated and, know stuff. But no, obviously the gang over at PragerU are the real intellectuals and truth tellers, as evidenced by the fact that they claim they can squeeze wholesale educational teaching on incredibly complex topics into 5-minute-long YouTube segments. And here I thought to be truly knowledgeable about a subject who had to read thousands of pages of books on it and listen to hundreds of lectures, but no! 5-minute YouTube segments by a conservative radio talk show host, all the knowledge in the world you need right there. Certainly PragerU is much better than those so-called universities, and can open people up to so many different points of view. Again, I've only been in college for about 2 months now, but I've already learned about way more complex and nuanced topics than I ever did in high school. Anyway, let's get on to the next reason. What you got, Dennis?
2. The arts. Throughout history, the primary purpose of art was to elevate people through beauty, artistic excellence, and emotional depth. To the left, the primary purpose of art, sculpture, and music is to shock. That's why so much contemporary art is meaningless and involves the scatological, meaning urine and feces. Yes, urine and feces. To give one of countless examples, in 2016, the Guggenheim Museum in New York featured a pure gold working toilet, which visitors were invited to use. The name of the exhibit was America, so one could literally relieve oneself on America.
That's weird. I didn't know fucking Jay-Z was a leftist. Okay, listen, I'm not an artist, at least not in the traditional sense, although some argue that any kind of creative product is art, which could technically include this video, I guess. But back to the point, this example is just so ludicrous. I mean, Dennis Prager is literally trying to argue because some 21st century art is bad, therefore it's all the left's fault. It's a well-known fact by most people that universities are heavily left-leaning, but I've never heard anyone ever argue that the left is destroying art. I mean, no one but you, Dennis Prager. Most accomplished artists do tend to be on the liberal side, though, since being open-minded and not constrained to traditionalism generally coincides with creativity. What Dennis Prager is trying to do is just blame literally every piece of art that he doesn't like as being the fault of leftism. Again, as I said before, I'm not an artist, so I can't really speak authoritatively on this subject. Personally, in regards to the America art exhibit in the Guggenheim Museum, I don't really find that type of art interesting. When I look at a piece of fan art like this, I become amazed by it because I can tell just how much effort and painstaking detail were used to create it, and it just comes out as looking like a complete feast for the eyes. I don't find an art piece like America beautiful because it doesn't look like it has that much meticulous effort put into its creation, even though it might be more famous and more expensive. Still, even though I don't personally find this exhibit to be particularly valuable, it would still be hard to argue, as Dennis Prager does, that the America exhibit is meaningless. It certainly has meaning that can be taken away from it, much more so than actually the amazing fan art I just flashed on screen. One takeaway you could glean from the America exhibit might be that even though the United States might have a shiny gold exterior, beneath the opulent facade it's kind of a shithole with many of the problems emblematic of a third world nation, like rampant income inequality, homelessness, complete inability to respond to a health crisis. All of this sounding familiar? Perhaps another takeaway from the America exhibit might be that the United States spends way more money than it needs to on things like prescription drug prices and healthcare, when those things that cost less than other countries might be just good, if not better. It's not that the exhibit America has no meaning, it's just a meaning that you might not personally agree with, Dennis. It honestly seems like a pattern with you that anything that expresses a message you disagree with, you label as worthless. Also, Dennis Prager acts like the America exhibit is just representative of all or most 21st century art in existence. That's not true. There are still inspiring and innovative artworks coming out in every medium in the most niche of communities. You just have to know where to look. I mean, they might not be as famous as something like the Mona Lisa. Honestly, in my opinion, though, a pretty boring and simplistic painting. So no, Dennis Prager, although there are postmodernistic artworks that you might not like, art as a whole is not ruined, and in fact it has developed into many new and different styles that never existed before. And it's not because of the left, it's because of humanity's tendency towards creativity and trying new things that are different from things of the past. Anyway, on to the next reason.
3. Literature. The English department at the University of Pennsylvania replaced the portrait of the greatest English language writer who ever lived, William Shakespeare, with a picture of a black lesbian poet. Why? Because he was a white European male. Leftist professors have replaced the pursuit of excellence with the pursuit of diversity.
Wait, The only evidence you give that the left is destroying literature is that one English department in one state removed one picture of William Shakespeare? What? First of all, I hear conservatives say this all the fricking time. They're destroying our Western culture because students aren't learning about the great Western classical works. Dennis Prager claims that the reason why William Shakespeare's picture in the English department of the University of Pennsylvania was replaced with the picture of a queer woman of color is that he was a white male and leftist English departments only care about diversity. Problem is, Dennis Prager never gives any evidence for this fact that that was the reason why his picture was replaced. He doesn't even give the name of the queer woman of color who replaced Shakespeare and gives no indication of how qualified she is or what she has accomplished or why she is inferior to William Shakespeare. He just spouts his opinion that William Shakespeare is the absolute greatest English writer who ever lived as an objective fact without ever backing it up. Greatest English writer who ever lived according to whom, Dennis Prager? According to you, that's who. I know this may come as a shock to you, Dennis, but straight white Christian males actually don't have a monopoly on great literature. I actually read a few of Shakespeare's works while I was in high school, like Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth, and you know what? I kind of thought they were shit. They were incredibly uninteresting and corny. Now, I recognize that the works of William Shakespeare were probably revolutionary for the time, but in a modern context, many people like me don't see them as these untouchable masterpieces immune from criticism. There are thousands of examples of great literature that have come out long after the death of William Shakespeare, and yes, some of them are from minorities. In my opinion, the best piece of literature that I ever read when I was in high school ELA class was a book called Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, hope I'm pronouncing that right, a cultural Muslim who was born in Afghanistan. And it wasn't because he is a part of a marginalized ethnic group in America. In fact, I actually despised the Islamic culture. It's because his book was, good. Dennis Prager's complaint about Western literature being destroyed by the left becomes even more ridiculous when you realize that William Shakespeare is still being taught fucking everywhere in nearly every high school and college-level literature class in the nation, regardless of whether or not it's mandatory material, much more so than black lesbian poet Audre Lorde. Yeah, I looked her up. Hashtag say her name as it. Am I right? Turns out she was an actual person that existed, and not just a minority that Dennis Prager can fearmonger about overtaking white males. It's just that nowadays more people are starting to come to the conclusion that perhaps people who are not white, male, straight, Christian, or died 400 fucking years ago can contribute and have contributed a lot to literature as well. Not Dennis Prager, though, because to conservatives like him, white male historical figures like the Founding Fathers of America and famous literary figures are to be worshipped like deities, never to be questioned or challenged, and should be the objective standard of goodness and quality. Honestly, Dennis Prager, it seems to me you're just really getting triggered that a picture of a white male was removed from a wall. Just saying. I guess I didn't really debunk Dennis Prager's claim that the left is destroying literature, but I mean, he never really made any arguments for that claim, so doing so is wholly unnecessary. Anyway, on to the next reason.
4. Late-night television. In America, late-night television shows were completely apolitical. The hosts believed their role was to entertain viewers and offer them relief and laughter after a difficult day. No longer, you cannot watch late-night television if you just want to be entertained. Late-night TV is now left-night TV.
Wow, okay. The way Dennis Prager was talking in the beginning of the video about how the left was destroying everything we hold near and dear, here I thought he was talking about super important things like the economy or foreign policy. I didn't realize he was talking about late night fucking television, something that is just so important in people's lives. So I will say that I've never, ever watched late night television. I don't have any interest in it, so I can't really judge whether Dennis Prager's claim of the left ruining late night television is true or not. But to be honest, I don't really care that much. I mean, whether late night television is good or not seems to be kind of inconsequential. I will say that from what I've heard from people who are on the left, a lot of late night television programs like SNL actually seem to have a heavy centrist-y neoliberal bias, not really left-wing per se. On top of that, I don't really buy into this idea that late-night television programs were just completely apolitical in decades past. While I do think that media and entertainment have become more overtly political in recent years, I don't think anything that makes commentary, humorous or not, about things having to do with human society is truly apolitical because, that's what politics is. Ideas about people and society and how people think that society should be. Like, for example, let's take the film Ghostbusters, released in 1984. Completely apolitical film, right? Well, it's a movie set in the 1980s Reagan presidency about a group of successful businessmen who get rich off their ingenuity and also make a positive difference in the world through their private enterprise, and portrays liberal academia and public regulations as stifling and useless. I'll let you guess what the creators' political persuasions were. By the way, I'm not just saying that because Ghostbusters has a heavy libertarian bias that I don't enjoy it, because unlike Dennis Prager, I'm actually able to find value in media that doesn't just completely cater to my own personal political stance. The reality is that oftentimes when people try to make the claim that media and art is apolitical, it's usually because it conforms to their personal politics that they see as the norm, and thus political messages are harder to spot. Like, for example, take the 2018 She-Ra cartoon reboot that came out on Netflix. I happen to like this cartoon quite a bit, and I don't really see it as political in any way, but when promotional material first came out, there was massive political controversy.
Just another butt-fucking of history by lazy leftists.
The reality is that while I might not see it as political that, gay characters are allowed to exist in cartoons, the 2018 She-Ra reboot is actually making a political statement, which is that gay people should be treated as normal and valid individuals in society, a political perspective that other people might not necessarily agree with. Even though you might remember late-night television shows that you watched when you were younger having no political biases whatsoever, Dennis, it's much more likely that they simply conform to the mainstream political culture of the time, and when that political culture shifted, those programs shifted with it, while you were still stuck in the past like the whiny boomer you are. Another thing I'll say is that one reason people on the right commonly cite as to why late-night television is left-wing is because it commonly makes jokes at Donald Trump's expense. I mean, the reason why that is a ridiculous argument is that you can have the exact same political ideology as Trump does and still see him as an insane lunatic who says about 50 ridiculous things every single day. I mean, do you honestly expect comedy segments to not mock the president? Everything about him is just absolute gold. Comedy material. Seriously.
I take full responsibility. It's not my fault that he came here. It's China's fault. And you know what? It's not Joe's fault that he came here either. It's China's fault.
Yeah, finding that to be hilarious and mockable does not make you left-wing. So yeah, in regards to this point, honestly, Dennis, I don't even really care about late-night television, and neither should anyone else. Anyway, on to the next reason given.
5. Religion. The left has ruined much of mainstream Protestantism and Catholicism and non-Orthodox Judaism, which are now little more than left-wing organizations with religious symbols. In many churches and synagogues, one is more likely to hear the clergy talk about political issues than about any other subject, including even the Bible.
First of all, if the left really is ruining religion, as you say, good. Religion is a horrible disease that should be eradicated from human society. But I just find it funny that Dennis Prager thinks that religious organizations are now nothing more than fronts for the left-wing ideology. I mean, when was the last time you've been to church, Dennis? Yes, it's true that there are more progressive-leaning churches that exist now, which has to do with mainstream culture becoming more progressive over time and churches adapting to not become completely irrelevant. But by and large, most churches and religious organizations in the United States are still much more conservative than the general population. I mean, when I was in Catholic school, I wasn't being taught about feminism and gay rights. I was being taught that abortion is murder, gay marriage is sinful, and only men could become priests. It was literally only a week ago that the Pope finally came around to saying that gay civil unions are acceptable, not even gay marriage. By the way, when have churches ever not been political? Religion has practically played some kind of role in every single political issue in the nation's history. As an example, Christianity and the churches were instrumental in acting as vehicles for both the fight against slavery and segregation and the fight to preserve slavery and segregation. Though considering the numerous passages in both the Old and New Testaments justifying the practice of slavery, I can't help but think that the anti-slavery and anti-segregation Christian activists were reaching more than a little. Since the founding of our nation, there have been constant attempts by Christian theocrats to try to base the laws of the government on Christian principles. Yet again, the reason why you might not have seen religious organizations as political in the past is because they affirmed your particular political persuasion, Dennis. Oh, and also, if you zoom in real close to the book that the clergyman is holding up in the animation, it reads, Guns, Global Warming, and Greed. Dennis, you have argued in the past that the decline of religion in the Western world is a bad thing because it means that there is also a decline in morality. If one is religious, shouldn't they use biblical morality to determine their politics? I mean, you act like the Bible is just this separate entity of stories that doesn't have anything to say about how people should live their lives and what they should believe about things. That's completely ridiculous. The Bible has obvious political implications for its followers. First of all, Jesus Christ was radically anti-violence and condemned all forms of violence, even in self-defense. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that Jesus would have been pretty anti-gun if he was around today. Jesus was also radically anti-wealth and gave constant speeches condemning greed and proclaiming that it was easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. So yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say that Jesus would have been pretty anti-capitalist if he were around today. Finally, although the Bible isn't explicitly pro-environmentalism, there are some interpretations that could reinforce that view. For example, some Christians hold to the idea of stewardship, the belief that human beings do not claim ownership over the earth, but are instead allowed to inhabit it by God, who wants humanity to look after and care for his creation, which, yeah, climate change, global warming, and environmental degradation pose an existential threat to. So yeah, if you're not a Christian who believes that looking after the environment is pointless since the rapture is coming any day now, it makes sense that you would care about global warming. I mean, go burn your fracking billionaire money and start reading the Bible, Dennis. Actually, no, don't do that, the Bible shit. Just become a humanist instead. Anyway, yeah, to conclude on this point, religion is stupid. It's always been political, and many political takeaways from the Bible are things that you don't agree with, Dennis. Anyway, on to the next reason.
6. Free speech. If there was anything virtually every American considered a bedrock value, it was freedom of speech. Yet the left is destroying even this unique American achievement. Almost half of America's young people say they believe in free speech, but not for hate speech. Yet the whole point of free speech is that it allows people to express any political or social position, including what any one of us considers hate speech. And hate speech now means any position the left differs with.
I kind of already talked about this in my response to the first reason Dennis gave as to why the left is destroying everything. Yes, there are some people on the left who do try to deplatform and censor people they don't agree with. Free speech is neither a left-wing or right-wing value, though. However, if you will allow me to go off into a bit of a tangent, I think a pretty good case could be made that free speech is a liberal value and anti-free speech is a conservative value. This is due to the definitions of liberal and conservative. As I said before, the definitions of liberal are favoring to progress or reform, as in political or religious affairs, noting or pertaining to a political party advocating measures of progressive political reform, of or pertaining to, based on, or advocating liberalism, based especially the freedom of the individual and governmental guarantees of individual rights and liberties. 4, favorable to or in accord with the concepts of maximum individual freedom possible, especially as guaranteed by law and secured by governmental protection of civil liberties. 5, favoring or permitting freedom of action, especially with respect to matters of personal belief or expression. 6, of or relating to representational forms of government rather than aristocracies and monarchies. 7, free from prejudice or bigotry, tolerant. And 8, open-minded or tolerant, especially free of or not bound by traditional or conservative values, ideas, etc. So yeah, under standard definitions of liberalism, freedom, and by extension free speech, is non-negotiable, which makes sense because the origin for the word liberal is liber, which means free. I mean, literally at the 8th definition, it said, a definition for liberal is open-minded or tolerant, especially free of or not bound by traditional or conventional values. On the other hand, the definitions of conservative are 1, disposed to preserving existing conditions, institutions, etc., or to restore traditional ones and to limit change. And 6, having the power or tendency to conserve or preserve. Nowhere in any of the definitions of conservative does it say anything about freedom, unlike basically all the definitions of liberal. And what's a good way to limit change and preserve traditional values? By trying to crack down on freedom of speech, of course, which is why throughout American history conservatives have reacted violently and brutally to suppress any and all progress and new ideas because they are threatening to them. And now, in the modern day, when conservative ideology is losing sway among the general population because it's shit, conservatives will cry and whine and scream about fringe examples of the SJWs trying to censor people and claiming that there is a full-fledged attack on freedom of speech against conservatives, despite the fact that, all the major conservative talking heads like Dennis Prager, Adam Carolla, Ben Shapiro, and Dave Rubin have all become rich and famous by attracting millions of viewers by expressing their free speech rights in the intellectual dark web. Here's the truth of the matter. Free speech is not a genuine value that these people like Dennis Prager hold. It's just a convenient strategy to constantly focus on free speech as a distraction because all the other values that they advocate for are utter horseshit. There are tons of left-leaning people who are fierce defenders of the First Amendment, including me, and you can't claim that the left as a whole is against free speech since Noam Chomsky, often referred to by many as the godfather of the modern left, is one of the fiercest defenders of freedom of speech of anybody and is famously quoted as saying, "If we don't believe in freedom of expression for those we despise, we don't believe in it at all." Meanwhile,
And we ought to do something, Mr. Senators. We have 2 great senators. We ought to come up with legislation that if you burn the American flag, you go to jail for 1 year. 1 year.
to conclude on this point, yes, there are people on the left who don't value free speech, but there are also many who do, and historically it is conservatives who have always come out against freedom, and just because you have the right to espouse stupid and offensive beliefs does not make them not stupid and offensive. Anyway, on to the next reason.
7. Race. America has become the least racist multiracial society in world history. On a daily basis, Americans of every race and ethnicity get along superbly. But the left constantly poisons young minds with angry diatribes about systemic racism, microaggressions, and white privilege.
I see. It's the left who's poisoning race relations in the United States. This is pretty common for conservatives to say, any mention of racial disparities in treatment and opportunities, it's just fanning the flames of racism. To be honest, I don't really care that much about what some people refer to as microaggressions. I don't really think they're that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. But Dennis, you're actually trying to argue that the white privilege and systemic racism don't exist in the United States? Okay, the United States of America, originally the British colonies of America, was a society that gained much of its wealth through the forced labor of a dehumanized people that suffered horrendous brutalization at the hands of white masters. The United States was one of the last nations with Western influences to end slavery. In 1965, after a civil war was fought by the South for its preservation, 246 years after the very first slave was brought to the colonies in 1619, Haiti abolished slavery 60 years before we did. After Reconstruction, blacks were discriminated against at every level of society and lynched for resisting the white establishment for 87 more years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. But you might be saying, all that was in the past. Sure, the United States might have one of the worst, most horrific histories of racial oppression of all time that the Nazis literally pulled inspiration from when trying to figure out how to set up their own system of racial oppression. But all that was in the past, and race relationships are totally fine now. Undoubtedly, the United States is a much less racist nation than it was 100 years ago, and black people, as well as other racial minorities, have a lot more comparative opportunities than they used to, and we should celebrate the fact that race relationships in the country have improved, rather than jerking off to the past like conservatives like Dennis Prager so often do. However, to think that once the Civil Rights Act was passed, only 56 years ago, by the way, everything just became totally fine, and the hundreds of years old system of racial oppression in the United States just poofed out of existence? No, that's not how life works. There are many people in the United States today who don't hold any prejudice towards racial minorities whatsoever and live in complete harmony with them. And there are also many people, particularly in the South, who are still extremely prejudiced and bigoted against minorities. I'm not going to try to debunk Dennis Prager's claim that the United States is the least racist, multiracial society in history, because I don't know if that's true or not, especially since it's kind of a non-specific claim, although I do seriously doubt it by most metrics, especially since nearly every modern society now has a mix of different races due to immigration. But I will say that I have extreme doubts, as we, as a nation, are not doing nearly as well as we could be with race relations. The thing is, though, that regardless of examples of individual racism, there is still an ever-present system of institutional racism in the United States, which makes it so that black people, by and large, have much less access to opportunities than white people. Dennis Prager, you seriously want to tell me that the fact that the average black household owns 10% of the wealth of the average white household is not due to institutional racism? Are black people just inferior? Is that the reason for that statistic? I'm not going to get into the entire history of the subtle ways both Republican and Democratic administrations have fucked over black people in the United States while still technically abiding by the Civil Rights Act, but safe to say, once you actually do research into this stuff rather than just sticking your fingers into your ears and saying, black people have equality under the law, so they just need to work harder, you will be shocked at all the ways in which life has been stacked against African Americans over the past 56 years. I recommend watching the Netflix documentary 13th for some more just general information. Getting back to Dennis Prager's point, though, it is not poisoning young minds to inform them of problems that have been proven to exist. You can't solve a problem if you are pretending it doesn't exist. Here's the thing, race doesn't actually exist. It's made up, which is supported by human genetics, and many people on the left, including myself, who understand that race is just an arbitrary social concept that shouldn't matter in the slightest. Yeah, we get really pissed off when we realize just how big of a factor race actually has played and still does play in American politics in dividing people against each other. Especially when the real divisions that exist are actually between the incredibly wealthy who hold most of the power in the nation and everyone else. Racism has actually had extremely negative effect on the well-being of American citizens of all races throughout American history. A big part of why the United States has been so resistant to social welfare programs like Medicare for All is that many racist whites have historically been very hostile to any government program that might help black people. To conclude on this point, it's not the left that are stoking the fires of racism in the nation. It is conservatives in the nation who have always fought to preserve subjugation of blacks and xenophobia against immigrants. And the current right-wing conservative president of the nation has called Mexicans rapists and criminals and fearmongered about black people coming to destroy the suburbs. People on the left are acknowledging a problem that there is hard data to prove exists and attempting to put forth solutions. Anyway, let's see the next reason, shall we?
8. The Boy Scouts. The left is destroying the Boy Scouts. They're not even the Boy Scouts anymore, they're just the Scouts. The left forced them to admit girls. Here's the thing about the left. It only destroys. It doesn't build. The Boy Scouts have helped shape tens of millions of boys into independent, strong, good men. So where's the left-wing version of the Boy Scouts? It doesn't exist. There is none.
Oh, your God. Oh, I don't see how anyone thinks this guy is a serious intellectual. Oh my gosh. Oh, well, where's the left-wing version of the Boy Scouts? It doesn't exist. Ha! Got him. Of course there's no left-wing version of the Boy Scouts. There's no right-wing version either, because people are able to join regardless of political affiliation and aren't becoming Boy Scouts to learn a political ideology. What the fuck are you talking about, Dennis? Also, listen to the way he's framing this. The left forced the Boy Scout to admit girls. First of all, the left is not responsible for Boy Scouts admitting girls. Much like with religion and late-night television, cultural values changed over time, and institutions and organizations change with them to remain relevant. And Also, since you were the one who made the original distinction between liberalism and leftism, I gotta tell you, most liberals would be in favor of allowing girls to join the Boy Scouts because they tend to be more open-minded. I mean, the Boy Scouts have not been destroyed because girls are now allowed to join. That's actually making them better because more people are now given the freedom to join it if they so choose. That's how this should be being framed, not the Boy Scouts are being forced to admit girls. Though, since conservatives like Dennis Prager usually side with the freedom of people in positions of authority to exercise their freedom over the freedom of people not in positions of authority, I'm not at all surprised why Dennis doesn't want little girls to have the freedom to join Boy Scouts if they want to. I have an uncle who's super conservative, and he's actually complained to me about this exact same issue. There are many conservatives who are just genuinely incensed at this reality, and my response is just, why do you give a fuck? I mean, I feel like in the minds of conservatives like Dennis Prager and my uncle, they think that Boy Scouts is just going to be completely taken over by girls and there aren't going to be any boys anymore. All the horror. Now, of course, that's not true. First of all, I've actually been around female children before. Not sure if that's the case with you, Dennis. Most of them want nothing to do with boys or exercise and will stay as far away from those two things as humanly possible. So I would have serious doubts that girls would just show up in sizable numbers to join the Scouts. However, when a decision to allow girls to join the Boy Scouts is made, it is made with the idea that not all girls are the same. Not all girls like doing things that are traditionally feminine, like playing with dolls or getting their nails painted. You know, some are tomboys, some like hiking and tying knots and I don't know, whatever the fuck the Boy Scouts do. Honestly, I joined the Boy Scouts when I was a kid and quit after like a week. It was so fucking boring. But I mean, you know, some girls like doing boring nature shit. And some boys like me don't. I mean, like, I do like doing nature shit, but it's just the nature shit done in the Boy Scouts was just not interesting. Anyway, but, you know, who are you, Dennis, to say that they shouldn't be able to do so? I mean, that they shouldn't be able to choose to do so. By the way, it goes in the other direction, too. I would very much be in favor of letting boys join the Girl Scouts if they want to. You know, if a boy wants to make cookies in an easy-bake oven and go around selling them door to door, then, you know, they should be able to do that. See, I'm a liberal, Dennis Prager, which means I'm in favor of freedom for people, but you, on the other hand, are a conservative, which means that you want control over people and what they do based on their gender. But as it turns out, men and women don't always fit neatly into the artificial gender roles that society has assigned them. Mind your own fucking business, Dennis. Anyway, on to the next one.
9. Male-female. In some ways, scariest of all, the left is committed to ending male and female as distinct categories. Children are increasingly raised not to think of themselves as a boy or a girl. Teachers are told not to refer to their students as boys or girls, just students. In New York City, parents do not have to check off male or female on their newborn's birth certificate. They can check off X. All this imposed gender confusion can only end up producing confused people and a confused society.
Honestly, this is really just the exact same point as the previous reason. You know, honestly, reasons 8 and 9 should have just been blended together, with reason 8 serving as an example for reason 9. Here's the thing, Dennis Prager, maybe it is confusing. Maybe it is confusing and difficult to understand the complexities that come with trying to understand gender in a modern context. Perhaps it was more simple back in black and white world of America's conservative past, when males and females were expected to conform to distinct complementary roles, when people didn't know much about the existence of gay people, bisexual people, asexual people, transgender people, non-binary people, people with irregular number of sex chromosomes, sometimes trying to navigate the ever-increasing complexity of non-traditional ideas about gender and sexuality in our modern society can be confusing. But to claim that the black and white mentality of our conservative past was a more accurate view of reality because it was easier to understand is just not correct. There are things in life that are confusing, Dennis, because life is a confusing mess, and most things don't fit into black and white categories. There might be someone who has 2 X chromosomes but has an inborn perspective of themselves as a man. And maybe that confuses you, Dennis. So maybe instead of tuning out everything that confuses you, because it wasn't taught to you when you were a kid, you could do your research. You could talk to people who don't identify as strictly cis heterosexual to gain a more nuanced view of human nature. Sexuality and gender exist on a spectrum, which, by the way, is the view most commonly espoused by most professional psychologists and sociologists nowadays. And although there are many people who identify on one end of the binary, there are also some individuals who don't. And that's okay, Dennis. It's not the end of the world. that teachers are using slightly more inclusive language to refer to their students. That's a good thing. It's not the end of the world that children aren't raised to have a perception of themselves based on their sex assigned at birth. That's a good thing. Why should a person define themselves by their gender? I am a heterosexual cis male, and I have never had any confusion about that fact, as my political views have changed over the years, but I don't define myself that way because it's an inborn quality that I didn't really have any choice over, and that doesn't really have much of an effect on my personality. I think myself as a humanist, liberal, a skeptic, an introvert, a knowledge seeker, a connoisseur of animation, and also a hentai. Those are things that make me, me. I don't define myself and my role in society by my sexuality and my gender, and no one should, because people are individuals, Dennis. Yes, there are generalizations that you can make about traits that might be more common in one gender as opposed to another, but there are always plenty of people who don't conform to those generalizations, and there are always people who don't fit neatly into the gender binary. I am in favor of egalitarianism, and I think that whether male or female or anything in between, people should be treated equally, and they should be able to choose what they want to do with their lives based on what they want for themselves. And yet that idea is scary to you, Dennis Prager. Again, says a lot about the kind of man that you are so committed to establishing control over people's lives based on their chromosomes. To conclude with this final reason for why the left is destroying everything, it's not all that terrifying of a thought that people are now learning to throw out traditional ideas about gender and gender roles and be more open-minded. Gender should be seen exactly for what it is, a human construct that may be somewhat useful in describing differences between people, but ultimately is just not the most important thing in the world. And when you, Dennis Prager, and people like you constantly talk about how important it is that there need to be two separate, narrowly defined genders with particular roles that people of either gender must necessarily conform to and adhere, it makes you kind of seem like a petty, ignorant authoritarian. Wow, at the end of the list already, there wasn't even a single coherent example of the left ruining something. All the examples Dennis Prager gave were either utterly inconsequential, had nothing to do with the left, aren't even problems, and are actually good developments, are not problems exclusive to the left wing, or are just completely ridiculous bullshit that doesn't relate to reality whatsoever and is merely a figment of Dennis Prager's conspiracy and paranoia-addled mind. Interesting.
So why does the left engage in so much destruction?
Yes. All the evil leftists of the world can do is destroy. It's not as if left-wing ideas have ever contributed anything, ever, to American society. I mean, except for ending slavery, child labor laws, the minimum wage, the New Deal, the interstate highway system, Medicare and Medicaid, Lyndon B. Johnson's massively successful anti-poverty programs. Nothing important. I mean, when I look at a guy like Bernie Sanders, I just see a guy who wants to just destroy everything because he doesn't have any policy positions whatsoever. He just wants to, that he wants to implement. He just wants to, destroy stuff like everyone on the left. There's nothing in his heart but hatred. Just so evil and destructive. Boy, we got a big brain intellectual here. You got a big brain, Dennis Prager.
So why does the left engage in so much destruction? Because it thinks America is essentially a bad country. But America is only bad compared to utopia. And the left is utopian. I'm Dennis Prager.
To be honest, as an American and as a person who is on the left, I like America. I don't think America is a bad country, and I think it is, on the whole, a much better place to live with more opportunity than most other countries in existence and throughout history. With that said, it could be much better, and there are many things that America is completely falling behind on, like healthcare, education, and economic mobility, that other developed countries completely school us on. I'm a patriot, but I'm not a nationalist. I don't blindly accept that America is the greatest nation on earth and can do no wrong. I criticize my country because I want it to see it improve, and I know it can because it has in the past. I'm also concerned as a human being and as a resident of planet Earth about the effect that the United States has on other countries and the world at large. While the United States is better off than most countries, our actions have also led to some very detrimental effects on the outside world. We have produced almost a fourth of all global greenhouse gas emissions since 1750. We do tons of foreign interventions that often have very detrimental consequences. Our unregulated economic institutions have literally crashed the world economy twice. Probably 3 times with the way things are going right now. I recognize that true utopia can never actually be achieved, but I continually strive for utopia because I know that things both have the potential to be much better than they are now if we put in the effort to change them, and they also have the potential to be much worse than they are now if we don't put any effort in at all, and simply let society and the environment decay. Yes, not all change is always beneficial. Sometimes progress can have unintended negative consequences that can be very difficult to perceive beforehand. But the United States and the human race as a whole cannot afford to be paralyzed and never try to make any improvements to society just because change and progression can be scary and uncertain. If we always had that mentality, we would still be living in caves and using stone tools. And I think in the end, the vast majority of people, of whatever political persuasion, also want things to be better than they are right now and don't buy into the idea that what we have now is the best there possibly is. But of course, I know that you don't like that idea, Dennis Prager, because you and people like you are the primary beneficiaries of the system as it exists now. So you use your billionaire fracking money to put out propaganda videos trying to smear anyone who wants to affect positive change in the world as radical leftists, whose ideas will never work, and hit home the message that disenfranchised people should just accept their lot in life because they deserve it. When Dennis Prager in the beginning of the video said that leftism is the most powerful ideology of the last 100 years, he wasn't really correct. Capitalism has been much more successful in taking root in the global economy. However, the political left does have the potential to challenge the most powerful people and institutions in the world, so it's really no wonder why Dennis Prager is so terrified. He should be. I'm not debunking terribly complex or intelligent arguments against the left-wing ideas here. I'm not exactly strawmanning Dennis Prager's arguments either, if he's the one presenting them. The fact is that according to the like-to-dislike ratio, 90% of the people who watched this video thought it had something meaningful or worthwhile to say, and I felt I really just needed to come out and go through all this in detail about why that's not the case, and this video by PragerU, much like nearly every single video on this YouTube channel, is actually complete propagandistic nonsense that doesn't say a single thing of worth that is worth listening to. I'm the skeptical skeptic. Always remember, be compassionate, be understanding, but most importantly, never stop questioning. Bye.
Urine and feces. Yes, urine and feces. Thank you for watching this video.